All right, so for this book review, I'm just going to comment a little bit about the book I just recently read called How Vaccines Work. And this was by David Miles, who is an immunologist. So I think I would give this book an 8 out of 10. And I would knock it just a couple points because, one, so it wasn't entirely clear some of the points that he was making. Um, there were some ways that I kind of had to fill in some gaps just based on other resources that I've used and am familiar with. And then I guess the other thing is it was somewhat hard to follow, and I don't know if that's just because of the reader um, or the layout of the book, which basically had three parts. It had sort of an intro to vaccines, and then a long section in the middle, which was all about specific vaccines and the history of how they were developed. And then the end, which just made some concluding remarks and comments about what we know about uh, side effects and other uh, factors, other issues that people are concerned about. So that's the general thought about the book. I would say my significant comments and thoughts as a reflection on it are it was very, for me personally, enlightening to learn a little bit about the history of vaccine development and really how extensive the whole field is. I think this is something that in our modern culture, we don't really have a full grasp of how how much work has gone into understanding and developing vaccines over the past couple of centuries, really. And so that was really very helpful to get a bigger picture of what that's all about. And so, a couple of the takeaways is really I just think about for me and my community, it's been suggested to me that, if when it comes time for me to vaccinate my kids, which I don't have, but at some point soon, hopefully, um, I should really do just as much research as I can and consider whether or not I would want to do that. And, that's fine. I think that that's perfectly reasonable to want to do some of your own research. And we definitely should consider doing that for whatever it is that we're doing in our daily lives. But I think the trouble with that suggestion is, well, you know, do I really consider myself enough of an expert to kind of fact check all of the research that has gone into this field, which is it's a vast field within health and medical science. And there are many, many people who, excuse me, have spent their entire lives working in it and helping to develop what we use as vaccines. And further, there's a whole history of it. So the work that has gone into developing what we have with vaccines is not just decades, but a couple of centuries worth. And so, do I imagine that if I go and do some research, I'm going to kind of prove something that shows me that it's not valid or not helpful to vaccine my kids? I don't know that that would be the case. Obviously, there are, I think, on an individual basis, there are reasons why certain people might um, reasonably choose not to vaccine themselves or their children. However, by and large, I can't help but think of it as the airplane analogy. So, on the one hand, you're not going to choose to get into an airplane based upon your own judgment of whether or not the pilots are qualified or the engineering of the plane is acceptable. That would mean that you would have to be a pilot and an aeronautical engineer, and there's all these things that we can't just on a few Google searches or maybe even just reading a book, we can't make those judgments. There are people that have been doing this as a career for a long time, and so I think on some level we kind of have to trust that. But also, I mean, when it comes to something like flying an airplane, is there the possibility that you could crash and possibly die? Yeah, that possibility is there, but it is so, so minor that nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but for the most part, people don't choose not to fly on a plane because of that 1 in like 11 million chance that you could die. When, you know, it, taking off in an airplane and landing within a couple of hours across the world, that's a pretty remarkable benefit to a really, really tiny risk of detriment. And it's very similar with vaccination. And there's so much data, there are so many studies that have been done, and we have so much information on how much more helpful they are. And with the possibilities of detriment of the tiny amount of risk, it really doesn't nearly outweigh all of the good that vaccines have done us. So those couple of things just, make me more confident in what vaccines are for us and our society. And I think when it comes to, considering whether or not we should use them, I think there are very, very few exceptional situations where we know why maybe one person wouldn't want to use it. But by and large, these are good things. And there's a lot more that can be said about the details for how we know that. But for now, that's just the kind of conclusion that I've gotten from reading this book. And yeah, I would recommend it. It's really helpful to understand more about how these work and why we use them in our culture.